Hello, my dear adventurers. Welcome back to another evening of shared stories and cozy speculation. Tonight, we are swinging through the streets of New York City, figuratively of course, and diving headfirst into one of the most anticipated films in recent memory, Spider-Man Brand New Day. Now, I have been a Spider-Man fan for as long as I can remember, and when that first trailer dropped in March of 2026, I genuinely had to sit down and process what I had just watched. It was emotional, it was mysterious, it was darker than anything we have seen from the MCU's version of Spider-Man before, and it raised about 100 questions that I have been turning over in my mind ever since. So tonight, we are going to unpack all of it. Every theory, every speculation, every wild idea that the fandom has been tossing around. And we are going to do it the way we always do here. Nice and easy. No rush. Just good conversation to drift off to. So grab your blanket, turn the lights down, get comfortable wherever you are, and let's spend the evening together talking about everyone's favorite wall crawler. Before we get started, if you enjoy what I do here and want a way to support the channel, consider checking out my Patreon linked in the description down below. But for now, let's set the scene. Spider-Man Brand New Day is the fourth standalone Spider-Man film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It is directed by Destin Daniel Cretton, the man who gave us Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, and the script comes from Chris McKenna and Eric Summers, who have been the writing team behind all three previous MCU Spider-Man films. Tom Holland is back as Peter Parker, obviously, and the supporting cast is absolutely stacked, but we will get into all of that as we go. The film is set to release on July the 31st, 2026, and the trailer that dropped in March already broke records. According to market research firm Wave Metrics, it pulled in 718.6 million views within its first 24 hours. That makes it the most watched trailer of all time, surpassing Deadpool and Wolverine's 365 million in just 8 hours. 8 hours. That is how hungry people are for this film. And honestly, after watching it myself, I completely understand why. The trailer confirmed something that fans had been speculating about ever since No Way Home ended back in 2021. This film picks up 4 years after the events of that movie, which means we are looking at roughly 2028 in the MCU timeline. Peter Parker is now an adult, probably around 22 years old, living entirely alone in New York City. And when I say alone, I mean completely and utterly alone. No friends, no family, no one who even knows his name. Just a man in a homemade suit, swinging through the city at night, protecting people who will never know who he is or what he has given up for them. Tom Holland himself called the film a rebirth, something completely new. He described it as the first movie in the next chapter, rather than the fourth installment of a franchise. And I think that framing is really important. Because everything that came before, Homecoming, Far From Home, No Way Home, all of that was essentially prologue. A massive, heartbreaking, beautiful prologue that brought Peter Parker to the point where he could become the Spider-Man we know from the comics. And now, finally, we're getting the real thing. Tonight, we're going to cover loads of ground. We will talk about Peter's mysterious physical transformation and what it might mean. We will dive into the biggest mystery of the film, who Sadie Sink is actually playing. We will explore the Punisher's role and his complicated dynamic with Spider-Man. We will discuss whether MJ and Ned will ever remember Peter. We will break down the enormous villain lineup. We will get into the comic book source material, the mystical spider totem mythology, the connections to the wider MCU, and of course, some of the wildest theories floating around the internet right now. Plenty to get through, so let's begin at the beginning. And honestly, the beginning of this story is one of the saddest things I have ever seen in a superhero film. To understand where Peter Parker is at the start of Brand New Day, we need to go back to how No Way Home ended, because that ending is the foundation that everything else is built on, and it is devastating. After Mysterio revealed Peter's identity to the entire world at the end of Far From Home, Peter's life completely fell apart. His name, his face, his home address, all of it was broadcast across every media outlet on the planet. He faced criminal charges. His girlfriend MJ and his best friend Ned became targets just for being associated with him. He could not go to school without causing a scene. He could not walk down the street without being recognized. His entire life was destroyed in every meaningful way. Desperate to fix things, Peter went to Dr. Strange and asked him to cast a spell that would make the world forget Peter Parker was Spider-Man. Strange agreed, but as he was casting the spell, Peter kept interrupting, asking for exceptions. He wanted MJ to remember. He wanted Ned to remember. He wanted his Aunt May to remember. He kept adding people to the list, and his constant interruptions caused the spell to fracture and break. The magical energy shattered the barriers between universes, and suddenly villains from other dimensions started pouring through. Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Electro, Sandman, the Lizard. People who knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man in their own worlds, pulled into Peter's universe by the broken spell. What followed was chaos. Peter tried to cure these villains rather than send them back to their deaths, because that is who Peter Parker is. He does not give up on people, even people who are trying to hurt him. But the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, sabotaged everything. He destroyed the cures Peter had been working on, and then, in the most devastating moment of the entire film, he attacked Peter's apartment and mortally wounded Aunt May. May died in Peter's arms, her last words reminding him that with great power comes great responsibility. The woman who had loved him unconditionally, who had raised him and supported him through everything, was gone. And it was because of Peter's choices, because he had tried to save everyone, and it had cost him the person who mattered most. 3 versions of Spider-Man, Peter alongside Tobey Maguire's and Andrew Garfield's versions of the character, fought together at the Statue of Liberty to stop the multiverse from collapsing entirely. It was an incredible battle, but even after they won, even after every villain was cured and returned to their proper universe, the multiverse was still unstable. The fractures were still spreading, and Dr. Strange told Peter the only way to fix it was not just making people forget that Peter Parker was Spider-Man, but making everyone forget that Peter Parker existed at all. Every memory, every record, every trace of him erased from the world entirely. Peter made the choice. He said goodbye to MJ and Ned, knowing they would not remember the goodbye. He told them he had to go away and that they would forget him. They protested, but Peter explained it was the only way. He embraced them both, and then Strange cast the spell. The magic rippled across the universe, rewriting reality. Birth records changed. School records vanished. Every person who had ever known Peter Parker simply forgot he existed, and Peter watched it happen. He watched MJ and Ned forget him in real time. The girl he loved, and the best friend he had ever had, just looking at him blankly, no recognition in their eyes. He became a ghost, a person who never was in the eyes of the world. In the aftermath, Peter visited the coffee shop where MJ worked. He saw her there, living her life, smiling, completely unaware that they had ever been anything to each other. He walked up to the counter. He was going to reintroduce himself, start over, try to rebuild what they had. But he stopped. He looked at her, and he realized that bringing her back into his life would only put her in danger again. The villains would keep coming. The threats would never stop. His life as Spider-Man would always endanger the people closest to him. So Peter Parker, a teenager who had already lost his parents, lost his uncle, lost his aunt, and now lost every friend and loved one he had ever known, turned around and walked out of that coffee shop without saying a word. The film ended with him swinging through snowy New York streets in his homemade suit, completely alone. No one to share his burden, no one to remember his sacrifice, no one to thank him for saving the entire multiverse. That is where we left Peter Parker 5 years ago, and that is where Brand New Day picks up. The official synopsis from Sony and Marvel Studios confirms the setup. 4 years have passed since the events of No Way Home. Peter is now an adult, living entirely alone, having voluntarily erased himself from the lives and memories of those he loves. He has devoted himself entirely to protecting his city as a full-time Spider-Man. But as the demands on him intensify, the pressure sparks a surprising physical evolution that threatens his very existence, even as a strange new pattern of crimes gives rise to one of the most powerful threats he has ever faced. 4 years. 4 years of complete isolation. 4 years of knowing exactly what he lost and choosing every single day not to get it back. That is an extraordinary amount of loneliness for anyone, let alone someone who is still in their early 20s. Peter Parker has been carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders since he was 15 years old, and now he is doing it with absolutely no support system whatsoever. The trailer gives us a glimpse of what those 4 years have looked like. We see Peter in a modest apartment, small and sparse, nothing like the Stark-funded lifestyle he once had access to. He is watching videos on his phone of Ned and MJ celebrating their first day at MIT. They are happy, laughing, living their lives, and Peter is watching them from the outside, a stranger to the two people who used to mean everything to him. There is a shot of Peter visiting Aunt May's grave in the rain, laying flowers. The tombstone reads, "When you help someone, you help everyone," a line that was also on her grave at the end of No Way Home, and it is a direct reference to the 2018 Spider-Man PlayStation game where May used that same quote. The tombstone dates suggest May died around 2024, which puts Brand New Day firmly in 2028 territory. And then there is MJ. She is shown in the trailer with a new boyfriend, played by Eman Esfandi. She has moved on. She has a life. She is happy. And Peter lives right next door to her, watching it happen, unable to say a single word about who he used to be to her. There is a moment in the trailer where Peter is at what appears to be a party in MJ and Ned's apartment, just hovering on the edges, watching the people he loves from the periphery. It is gut-wrenching. But here is a fascinating detail that eagle-eyed fans spotted. MJ's apartment is apparently packed with Spider-Man photographs. She has been collecting images and articles about Spider-Man, even though she has no conscious memory of why she might be drawn to him. Some fans have theorized that this mirrors exactly how MJ figured out Peter was Spider-Man back in Far From Home. She did not need evidence. She did not need proof. She just knew, on some instinctive level, that Peter Parker and Spider-Man were the same person. And maybe, even after the spell, some part of her still knows. Some part of her remembers, even if she cannot articulate what it is she is remembering. There is one shot in the trailer that has absolutely set the fandom on fire. Spider-Man and MJ, face to face, at night, high up on what appears to be a rooftop or a tall building. They are looking at each other, and whatever is happening in that moment, it is clearly deeply emotional for Peter. It comes right after a line from the Punisher who says, "You're losing it, kid." The clear implication is that Peter's personal world is falling apart at the same time his body is changing, and the combination of the two is pushing him to his absolute limit. One of the trailer's most beautiful shots recreates the cover of Amazing Fantasy number 15, published in August of 1962. That is the very first Spider-Man comic ever published, the original issue that introduced the world to Peter Parker, and the fact that they are recreating it here in Brand New Day is Marvel's way of saying something really significant. Everything before this was origin story, Homecoming, Far From Home, No Way Home. All of it was the journey of becoming Spider-Man. Now we are here. Now we have the real thing, a Spider-Man who has lost everything and chosen to keep going anyway. And the fascinating thing about this interpretation is that Tom Holland actually agrees with it. He described Brand New Day not as a sequel, but as a fresh start, the beginning of a new chapter. And honestly, I think he is right. No Way Home did not just end a trilogy. It reset Peter Parker to his most fundamental state. No technology, no mentor, no support. Just a man with spider powers and an unshakable belief that he has to help people, regardless of the personal cost. It is actually pretty wild when you think about the implications. Peter Parker has been an Avenger. He has fought Thanos. He has traveled to space. He has wielded Stark technology that would make most governments jealous. And now he is back to basics. Homemade suit, empty apartment, a city that does not know his name and will never thank him. In many ways, he is more Spider-Man now than he has ever been, the essential core of the character, distilled to its purest form. But 4 years of that kind of isolation does something to a person. And according to the official synopsis and everything we have seen in the trailer, it is doing something to Peter Parker that goes beyond emotional damage. Something is happening to his body, something frightening and uncontrollable. His very DNA is changing, and the pressure and loneliness of the last 4 years might be what triggered it. Which brings us to the theory that has dominated every conversation about this film since the trailer dropped. What exactly is happening to Peter Parker, and what does it mean for the future of Spider-Man? Now, let's talk about the single most striking element of the Brand New Day trailer, because honestly, when I first saw it, I had to rewind and watch it 3 times just to make sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. Peter Parker is mutating, not in a subtle way, not in a minor upgrade sort of way. His entire body is changing, and it looks terrifying. Here's what the trailer shows us. Peter collapses in his apartment, clearly in distress. Sometime later, he wakes up outside, suspended in midair, wrapped in a cocoon made entirely of webbing. Not webbing from his mechanical web shooters. This is organic webbing. Webbing that his body has produced on its own while he was unconscious. He is dangling outside his apartment window in nothing but his boxers, encased in a biological web structure that he did not create intentionally. And then the cocoon breaks, he starts falling, and instinctively, without any web shooters attached to his wrists, he fires a web from his bare wrist and catches himself. Organic webbing. Peter Parker now has the ability to produce webs directly from his own body, just like Tobey Maguire's version of Spider-Man from the Sam Raimi films back in 2002. And that is just the beginning. There are other moments in the trailer that paint a disturbing picture of what is happening to Peter. His senses have become so heightened that a single drop of water is enough to overwhelm him. Think about that for a second. Spider-Man has always had enhanced senses, but this is something else entirely. This is sensory overload at a level that makes it impossible to function. His apartment is shown completely covered in webbing, like something out of a horror film. And in the trailer's final moments, in what might be the most unsettling shot of the entire thing, Peter's eyes turn completely black. Not dark, not shadowed, pitch black, like an actual spider's eyes. So what is going on? Well, the answer, or at least the most likely answer, comes from a comic book storyline that most casual fans might not be familiar with, but one that Spider-Man readers know very well. It is called The Other. The Other was a crossover event that ran from 2005 through 2006 across multiple Spider-Man comic book titles. In that storyline, Peter Parker begins experiencing mysterious symptoms. Blackouts, dizzy spells, his powers fluctuating unpredictably. He goes to the one person who might understand what is happening to him, the world's foremost expert on radioactively triggered mutation, a man named Bruce Banner. Sound familiar? Because that is exactly what happens in the Brand New Day trailer. Peter introduces himself to Bruce Banner, who is shown in his human form rather than as the Hulk, and Banner runs tests and delivers the grim news. If DNA is mutating, Banner tells Peter, that would be enormously dangerous. In the comics, the situation escalates rapidly. Peter encounters a terrifying villain called Morlun, a supernatural predator who hunts spider totems across the multiverse. Morlun essentially kills Peter in combat, but Peter does not stay dead. His body undergoes a mystical transformation, shedding his old skin and emerging from a giant web cocoon on the Brooklyn Bridge. He is reborn, quite literally, with a suite of new abilities beyond anything he had before. Night vision, the ability to sense vibrations through his webbing, wrist-mounted stingers that can extend from his forearms, adhesion on his back so he can carry people while climbing, the ability to communicate with spiders, and yes, organic webbing, produced naturally by his body rather than from mechanical devices. The storyline also introduced a concept that became incredibly important to Spider-Man mythology going forward, the idea of spider totems. According to this mythology, each dimension in the multiverse has a mystically chosen spider defender, a being called a totem. Peter Parker is the spider totem of his dimension. His powers are not just the result of a radioactive spider bite. They are part of something larger, something cosmic and mystical that connects all the spider heroes across every universe. If that sounds familiar, it should. Dan Slott built on this mythology when he created the Spider-Verse event in 2014, which became the basis for Sony's animated Spider-Verse trilogy. Brand New Day appears to be drawing heavily from The Other, but it also seems to be pulling from another classic Spider-Man story, the neogenic nightmare arc from Spider-Man the Animated Series, which aired in 1995 and 1996. In that storyline, Peter's mutation goes even further than it did in The Other. His spider DNA begins to overwhelm his human DNA, and he starts transforming into something monstrous, extra limbs, animalistic instincts, a creature that fans have come to call Man-Spider, essentially Peter Parker's worst nightmare version of himself, a being that is more spider than man. The trailer's imagery strongly suggests that Brand New Day is blending elements from both of these stories. The cocoon and organic webbing come from The Other. The dangerous, uncontrollable mutation that threatens Peter's very humanity comes from the man-spider concept. And Bruce Banner's involvement mirrors The Other directly, where Peter also sought out Banner for help. Here is a fun fact that I think puts this into really interesting perspective. Slash Film described Brand New Day as an inversion of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 2. In that beloved film from 2004, Peter Parker was going through a personal crisis, struggling with his identity and his relationships, and his powers started failing him. He lost the ability to climb walls, his web stopped working, his strength diminished. It was a physical manifestation of his emotional turmoil, his body reflecting his psychological state. Brand New Day seems to be doing the exact opposite. Peter is going through an equally devastating personal crisis, isolated and grieving, and his powers are not failing. They are exploding. He is not losing his abilities. He is gaining too many. The abundance is what is threatening him, not the absence. Same emotional foundation, completely inverted physical manifestation. Now, there is a really compelling fan theory about what is triggering this mutation, and I think it deserves serious consideration. Some fans believe that Peter's transformation is not random. It is not just his spider DNA acting up for no reason after years of being stable. The theory is that Peter's 4 years of extreme isolation, grief, and emotional suppression have created the conditions for this mutation to occur. His body is responding to the trauma. The spider side of him is emerging because the human side of him is being crushed under the weight of everything he has been carrying alone. Think about it. Peter Parker has experienced more loss than almost any character in the entire MCU. He lost his parents when he was young. He lost his uncle before the events of the films. He lost Tony Stark, his mentor and father figure in Avengers Endgame. He lost Aunt May to the Green Goblin, and then he voluntarily gave up every remaining person who loved him to save the multiverse. That is an almost incomprehensible amount of grief for a single person to carry, and he has been carrying it alone for 4 years with no one to talk to, no one to lean on, no one to remind him that he is more than just Spider-Man. He is also Peter Parker, a human being who needs connection and love and friendship. Without that human anchor, the spider is taking over. That is the theory anyway, and I think it is brilliant. It takes the superhero mutation concept and roots it in something deeply emotional and human. Peter is not transforming because of some external force or some villain's scheme. He is transforming because he is lonely and broken, and the non-human parts of his biology are filling the void that his human connections used to occupy. There is another layer to this that I find absolutely fascinating. Peter already knows that organic webbing is possible. He met Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man during the events of No Way Home, and he noticed that version of himself had organic webs rather than mechanical ones. At the time, it was just a quirky difference between their universes. But now, years later, Peter's own body is developing the same ability. It is almost as if meeting his multiversal counterparts planted a seed, reminded his biology of what was possible, and the stress of the following years caused that seed to bloom. The organic webbing itself has a wonderfully tangled history that I think is worth talking about for a moment, because it connects directly to the film's title. When Sam Raimi made his first Spider-Man film in 2002, he made the controversial decision to give Peter organic webs instead of mechanical web shooters. Raimi felt that Peter was supposed to be an everyman hero, and having him also be a mechanical genius who could invent unprecedented technology felt like it undermined that ordinariness. It was a polarizing choice, but it proved popular enough that Marvel Comics actually adopted it. In 2004, a storyline involving a villainess called the Queen mutated Peter's powers and gave him organic webbing in the comics, specifically to match the films. But here is the ironic part. When the original Brand New Day comic storyline began in 2008, following the events of One More Day, one of the many changes to Peter's status quo was that he lost the organic webbing and went back to using mechanical web shooters. The organic webs were retconned away as part of the reset, and now, 20 years later, the MCU's brand new day is bringing them back. It is a beautifully circular piece of Spider-Man history. The question that everyone is asking, though, is how far will this transformation go? Will we actually see a full man-spider transformation on screen? Will Peter grow extra limbs? Will he lose his ability to think clearly? His human mind overwhelmed by animal instinct? The trailer's shot of his black eyes suggests something deeply inhuman is happening, and Bruce Banner's warning about the danger of mutating DNA implies this could be life-threatening. I think the most likely answer is that Peter will reach the brink of transformation, but pull himself back. The film's title, Brand New Day, implies emergence and renewal, not destruction. He will go to a very dark place, possibly closer to Man-Spider than anyone would be comfortable with, but he will come through it on the other side. Stronger, changed, with new abilities that he has learned to control rather than fear. The cocoon imagery supports this. A cocoon is not a prison. It is a chrysalis. It is where caterpillars become butterflies. It is where the old form is dissolved and something new is created. Peter Parker is not dying. He is becoming. But what exactly he is becoming, and whether the catalyst is scientific or mystical, that is where things get really interesting. Because there is a voice in the trailer that suggests the answer might not be as straightforward as mutating DNA. Keith David, the legendary voice actor, provides a mysterious voiceover in the trailer. His deep, resonant voice talks about spider life cycles and the concept of rebirth. It feels distinctly mystical rather than scientific. If Bruce Banner represents the scientific explanation for what is happening to Peter, then Keith David's character might represent the mystical one. And if the film is drawing from the other, there is a specific mystical entity that could explain everything. The Great Weaver, a spider deity that oversees the totem mythology and is responsible for granting enhanced abilities to those it deems worthy. Now, I want to be clear. We do not know for certain that the film will go in this direction. It might keep things grounded in science. Peter was bitten by a radioactive spider. His DNA is mutating further, and that is all there is to it. But the cocoon imagery, the rebirth language, the mysterious voiceover about spider life cycles, all of it points towards something more than just genetics. And honestly, introducing the mystical side of Spider-Man to the MCU would be a massive and exciting step. It would connect the character to the wider Spider-Verse mythology that Sony has been building in their animated films. It would set up future villains like Morlun and the Inheritors, and it would add a completely new dimension to a character who, in the MCU, has always been defined by science and technology. Tony Stark's protege becoming something that science cannot explain. There is a beautiful irony in that. Fun fact that I think puts Peter's transformation into some really cool historical context. The very first Spider-Man story where Peter mutated beyond his normal powers was the Six Arms Saga from 1971, published in Amazing Spider-Man issues 100 through 102. In that story, Peter tried to cure himself of his spider powers and accidentally gave himself 4 extra arms. That story also introduced Morbius, the living vampire, by the way. So Spider-Man's mutation stories have a long history of introducing new characters. If Brand New Day follows that tradition, Peter's mutation might not just change him. It might attract the attention of something or someone that has been waiting for exactly this kind of transformation to occur. And speaking of new characters who might be drawn to Peter's transformation, there is one addition to the Brand New Day cast who has been the subject of more speculation, debate, and theorizing than possibly any other casting choice in MCU history. We need to talk about Sadie Sink. Since the moment her casting was announced, the question of who Sadie Sink is playing in Spider-Man Brand New Day has been the single most debated topic in the Marvel fandom. And the Brand New Day trailer, despite being packed with reveals and teases, deliberately kept her identity a secret. We never see her face. Not once. What we do see is a hooded figure in a green jacket with a yellow hood, shot from behind, which matches set photos of Sink that leaked during production. We see what appears to be her character orchestrating a prison break, and we see the aftermath of what seem to be her abilities, people being controlled against their will, their minds hijacked by an unseen force. Let me walk you through the major theories one by one, because each of them has compelling evidence and each of them would take the film in a completely different direction. The most popular theory by far is that Sadie Sink is playing Jean Grey, one of the founding members of the X-Men and one of the most powerful mutants in Marvel Comics history. Jean is a telepath and a telekinetic, meaning she can read and control minds, as well as move objects with her thoughts. The evidence for this theory is actually quite strong. In the trailer, there is a moment where Spider-Man stops a rampaging tank that is tearing through the streets. When he opens the vehicle to confront the driver, he finds a harmless elderly woman inside. She smiles at him, confused, clearly having no idea where she is or how she ended up driving an armored tank through New York City. The camera then pans to a damage control officer behind Spider-Man, who also appears to be under some kind of mental influence. This is textbook telepathic manipulation. Someone is jumping from mind to mind, controlling people remotely, and the most obvious Marvel character associated with that power set is Jean Grey. There have also been reports, particularly from Screen Rant and The Direct, that the Department of Damage Control is actively hunting mutants in this film. If Sadie Sink's character is indeed a mutant being persecuted by a government agency, that immediately sets up the mutant persecution narrative that has been foundational to X-Men stories for over 60 years. And introducing Jean Grey in a Spider-Man film, of all places, would be a genuinely bold move by Marvel Studios. It would signal that mutants are not being saved for their own separate introduction. They are already here, woven into the existing fabric of the MCU, hiding in plain sight. But here is where it gets complicated. Deadline confirmed back in late 2025 that Sink was cast in a lead villain role. A villain. Jean Grey is traditionally a hero, one of the most iconic heroes in all of Marvel Comics. So if Sink is playing Jean, she would need to be either acting against her will, being manipulated by someone else, or perhaps in a morally gray space where her actions seem villainous but are actually motivated by self-preservation or protection of other mutants. The idea of damage control hunting her down and her fighting back with her telepathic abilities would make her sympathetic rather than truly evil, which could work really well. There is also an interesting detail that fans noticed in the trailer. A girl is briefly shown wearing a Jets shirt with hair that appears to be white and brown, which some people immediately associated with Rogue from the X-Men, who famously has a white streak in her hair. Now, this is almost certainly a stretch. That is probably just a background extra. But if Sink is playing Jean Grey, the possibility of other mutants appearing in the film, even briefly, becomes much more plausible. The second major theory is that Sink is playing Typhoid Mary, and honestly, this one might actually fit the film's tone better than Jean Grey. Typhoid Mary is historically a Daredevil and Spider-Man antagonist, a character with dissociative identity disorder who possesses telekinetic and pyrokinetic abilities. She has frequently been employed by the Kingpin as an assassin and enforcer. Given that Brand New Day has been confirmed as a street-level story featuring the Punisher, Tombstone, Scorpion, and the Hand, a grounded psychic villain like Typhoid Mary fits the narrative ecosystem much more naturally than a cosmic-level telepath. She is dangerous, unpredictable, and tragic in equal measure, and Sync's acting range would be perfect for a character with multiple personalities. The third theory is Shathra, and this one connects directly to the spider totem mythology we discussed earlier. Shathra is a shape-shifting multiversal wasp villain from the Spider-Verse comics, a predator that specifically hunts spider totems. If Brand New Day is indeed adapting elements of the other storyline and introducing the concept of spider totems to the MCU, then having the villain be a totem hunter would make perfect sense. It would explain why Sync's character seems to know who Peter is despite the spell, because her knowledge would not be based on memory, but on some kind of supernatural spider sense that allows her to identify totems regardless of magical disguises. The fourth theory is one that I find personally fascinating. Some fans believe Sync could be playing Mayday Parker, who in the comics is the daughter of Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson from an alternate future timeline. Now, this sounds wild, but think about it. No Way Home established the multiverse. We have seen characters cross between dimensions, a future version of Peter and MJ's daughter arriving in the present, perhaps from the Tobey Maguire universe where Peter and MJ are married, would be an emotionally devastating twist. Imagine Peter meeting a daughter he will never have, from a timeline where he did not sacrifice everything. That would be heartbreaking in the best possible way. Other theories include Firestar, a mutant with a long comic book history, with Spider-Man, who has been a member of both the X-Men and the Avengers. There is Rachel Summers, the daughter of Cyclops and Jean Grey, from a dystopian future timeline. There is Rachel Cole Alves, a vigilante ally of the Punisher, which would explain reports that Sync's character has a close relationship with John Bernthal's Frank Castle. And there are the perennial guesses of Gwen Stacy or Black Cat, though those seem less likely given what we have seen. Here is the detail that complicates every single theory. Sync's character apparently knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. There have been reports of audio from the trailer where her character confronts Peter and says something along the lines of, "You're a mess, Spider-Man." She knows his identity, but that should be impossible. Doctor Strange's spell erased Peter Parker from everyone's memory. No one remembers him. So, how does this new character know who he is? Either the spell is breaking down, or she learned his identity through means that are not dependent on memory, or she is from somewhere the spell does not reach, like another universe or another dimension or the future. That single detail narrows the field significantly and makes theories like Shathra, Mayday Parker, or a spell-immune mutant much more compelling. Fun fact about Sadie Sink herself. She became a household name through her extraordinary performance as Max Mayfield in Stranger Things, particularly in Season 4, where her character's confrontation with the villain Vecna was one of the most emotionally powerful scenes in the entire series. It is actually rather poetic that she has gone from battling one of television's most memorable villains to becoming a villain herself in one of cinema's biggest franchises. Her acting range, the ability to convey vulnerability and menace simultaneously, makes her an ideal choice for whatever morally complex character Marvel has in mind. Whatever the answer turns out to be, Marvel and Sony are clearly enjoying the mystery. They have deliberately hidden Sync's face in all marketing material, refused to confirm her character's identity, and constructed the trailer specifically to fuel speculation without providing answers. We will likely not know for certain until the film releases on July 31st, and honestly, that kind of sustained mystery is part of what makes the anticipation so exciting. But Sadie Sink is not the only major new addition to Peter's world. There is another character who has been there in the trailer from the very first frame, a character who represents a completely different kind of threat to Spider-Man. Not a supervillain, not a monster from another dimension, just a man with a gun and a very different idea of what justice looks like. Let's talk about the Punisher. John Bernthal reprises his role as Frank Castle, also known as the Punisher, making his big-screen MCU debut in Brand New Day. And honestly, seeing him in a Spider-Man film is something I never thought I would actually get to witness. The Punisher has been a fan favorite since his Netflix series, and Bernthal's portrayal of the character is widely considered one of the best performances in all of Marvel's live-action history. The man becomes Frank Castle. There is no separation between actor and character, and now he is sharing the screen with Tom Holland's Spider-Man, which creates one of the most fascinating dynamics in all of comics. The trailer makes it clear that Spider-Man and the Punisher are not strangers. Peter calls him Frank, which implies they have already crossed paths at some point during the 4-year gap between films. There has apparently been a whole relationship here that we have not seen, and that immediately raises interesting questions about what their previous encounters looked like. The trailer also shows us a spectacular action sequence. The Punisher is driving his iconic battle van, and he drives it directly into Spider-Man. Peter leaps onto the front of the van, webs the barrel of Castle's gun, and then kicks him out through the back of his own vehicle. Castle hits the ground and starts to get up, growling what sounds like the beginning of a very colorful expletive before Peter webs his mouth shut and tells him to go home. It is a brilliant piece of action filmmaking that perfectly captures their dynamic. Spider-Man is faster, stronger, and more agile, but the Punisher is relentless, experienced, and absolutely unwilling to back down. In the comics, Spider-Man and the Punisher have one of the most interesting relationships in all of Marvel. They are both fighting crime. They both want to protect innocent people. But they have fundamentally incompatible methods. Spider-Man will not kill. He refuses to cross that line no matter how dangerous the villain, no matter how dire the situation. He believes in redemption, in second chances, in the possibility that even the worst person can change. The Punisher does not believe in any of that. Frank Castle kills criminals. That is what he does. He is judge, jury, and executioner, and he makes no apologies for it. He has seen too much suffering caused by people who were given second chances and used them to hurt more innocent people. This moral tension is what makes their dynamic so compelling. Neither of them is wrong exactly. They are both coming from a place of genuine conviction, but they cannot coexist. Spider-Man cannot stand by while the Punisher executes people, and the Punisher cannot understand why Spider-Man keeps letting dangerous criminals live to hurt again. It is an irreconcilable philosophical difference, and it makes every interaction between them electric. Producer Kevin Feige reportedly said that the Punisher would have a different tonality in this film compared to his Netflix appearances, which makes sense given that Brand New Day is a theatrical release with presumably a different rating target. But Bernthal is Bernthal. He brings an intensity to Frank Castle that is almost overwhelming. Even in a more restrained context, that character is going to hit like a freight train. There is a line in the trailer that I think is really important. The Punisher says to Peter, "You're losing it, kid." That is not a taunt. That is not a villain gloating. That is something much more interesting. It is concern. Frank Castle, a man who has lost everything and rebuilt himself around violence and vengeance, is looking at Peter Parker and seeing a young man who is heading down the same path. Peter is alone. Peter is in pain. Peter is losing control of his powers and his emotions. And the Punisher, of all people, recognizes what that looks like because he has been there himself. I think the Punisher's role in this film is going to be more nuanced than simple antagonist. He will start as a problem for Spider-Man, someone whose lethal methods Peter cannot ignore. But as the film progresses and Peter's situation deteriorates, Castle might become an unlikely voice of reality. Not a friend, never a friend, but someone who tells Peter truths that no one else is around to tell him, because everyone else has forgotten he exists. Jon Bernthal filmed his Brand New Day scenes back-to-back with the untitled Punisher television special that is also coming in 2026, and the filmmakers reportedly coordinated closely with the Daredevil Born Again creative team to make sure events line up between the properties. This suggests that the Punisher's appearance in Brand New Day is not just a cameo. It is part of a larger street-level narrative that connects Spider-Man, Daredevil, and the Punisher in meaningful ways. Fun fact that I think comic readers will really appreciate. The Punisher's very first appearance in Marvel Comics was in Amazing Spider-Man issue 129, published in 1974. That is right. The Punisher debuted as a Spider-Man villain. He was hired to assassinate Spider-Man before eventually realizing he had been manipulated and turning against his employers. Cretton reportedly had that exact comic book cover on the art department wall as one of several covers he was planning to recreate in the film. So in a very real sense, Brand New Day is bringing the Punisher home. Back to the title where he started. And speaking of people coming home, or at least trying to, we need to talk about the question that is breaking everyone's heart. Will MJ and Ned ever remember Peter Parker? This is the emotional core of the entire film, and honestly, just thinking about it makes me a bit sad, because the situation Peter is in is almost unbearably cruel. The people he loves are alive. They are right there. MJ lives next door to him. Ned is her roommate or close by. They are happy, healthy, living their lives, going to MIT, making new friends, building futures. And Peter can see all of it happening. He is close enough to reach out and touch them, but they have no idea who he is. They do not remember the boy who loved them, who fought alongside them, who would have died for them 100 times over. To MJ and Ned, Peter Parker is just some guy, a stranger, a nobody. The way No Way Home ended this storyline was genuinely devastating. Peter walked into that coffee shop, saw MJ behind the counter, and made the conscious decision not to reintroduce himself. Not because he did not want to. You could see it on his face, the desperation to just say something, to start over, to try again. But he stopped himself because he knew that pulling her back into his world would put her in danger. The villains would come. They always come, and the only way to truly protect the people he loves is to stay away from them. 4 years later, the Brand New Day trailer shows us that Peter is still honoring that choice, but it is clearly destroying him. He watches their social media videos. He sees them celebrating milestones he should be part of. He lives next door to the woman he loves and watches her build a new relationship with someone else. That is a special kind of torture, made worse by the fact that Peter chose it. He was not forced into this isolation by a villain or a cosmic event. He asked for it. He sacrificed his own existence to save the multiverse. And every single day, he has to live with the consequences of that choice. Now, the big question: will the spell be broken? Will MJ and Ned get their memories back? The trailer offers some tantalizing clues. First, there is MJ's apparent collection of Spider-Man photographs. She has been accumulating images and articles about Spider-Man, filling her living space with them, even though she has no conscious reason to be so fascinated by this particular hero. This mirrors her behavior in Far From Home, where she figured out Peter's identity through pure intuition rather than evidence. MJ is smart, she is observant, and on some subconscious level, she seems to recognize that Spider-Man is important to her, even if she cannot articulate why. There is also a theory that has been circulating, and I think it is really clever. In the trailer, there is a moment where MJ apparently refers to Spider-Man as her friendly neighbor. Now, that could be nothing. It is a common phrase associated with the character, but some fans on Dexerto have pointed out that MJ saying those specific words to Spider-Man with that particular familiarity could be the film hinting that she has already started to figure things out. She is playing coy, just like she did in Far From Home, when she collected evidence of Peter's identity before casually revealing that she knew all along. What if the same thing is happening here, on a much larger and more emotionally charged scale? And then there is the shot we talked about earlier. Spider-Man and MJ face to face, high above the city at night. Something has brought them together. Maybe Peter saved her from danger, and she saw something in his eyes. Maybe she confronted him after piecing together too many coincidences. Maybe the spell is genuinely starting to fracture, and fragments of memory are bleeding through. Whatever the reason, that moment is clearly monumental for both of them, and I think it might be the emotional climax of the entire film. Here is what makes this situation so much more complicated than a simple memory restoration. Even if MJ learns that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, even if she discovers that they were once in love, she will be learning it for the first time. She will not have the memories they shared. She will not remember their first awkward conversations in Far From Home, or the way he practiced asking her out, or their kiss on Tower Bridge in London, or the desperate embrace before the spell erased everything. All of that exists only in Peter's memory. MJ might come to know the facts of their relationship, but she will never share the experience of it. And that is heartbreaking in a way that a simple magical fix cannot solve. I think the film will go for something more nuanced than just undoing the spell. MJ will choose to know Peter. She will choose to be part of his life, not because she remembers what they had, but because she is drawn to who he is now. And that is actually more powerful and more romantic than getting her memories back. It means she falls for him twice. It means their connection is strong enough to transcend even the most powerful magic in the universe. It means that some bonds cannot be erased, no matter what. The original Brand New Day comics have a beautiful moment that fans are hoping the film will echo. After the memory wipe in the comics, Peter and Mary Jane encounter each other, and Peter asks, "Do I know you?" Mary Jane responds, "We've met in another life." It is a simple exchange, but it carries the weight of an entire relationship. If the film includes something similar, I think theaters are going to need to hand out tissues. As for Ned, I suspect his role will be secondary to MJ's in terms of the memory storyline, but still important. Jacob Batalon is confirmed to return, and seeing the friendship between Peter and Ned rebuild from scratch would be a wonderful parallel to Peter and MJ's romantic reconnection. Ned was Peter's guy in the chair, his best friend, the person who was most excited about Peter being Spider-Man. Getting that friendship back, even in a new form, would be deeply satisfying. Fun fact about the comic book version of this storyline. In the original Brand New Day comics, the memory wipe was the result of a deal Peter made with Mephisto, Marvel's version of the devil. Peter traded his marriage to Mary Jane in exchange for saving Aunt May's life. It was one of the most controversial storylines in Spider-Man history, and fans are still arguing about it nearly 2 decades later. The MCU wisely changed the circumstances. Peter's sacrifice was selfless rather than selfish, a choice made to save the entire multiverse rather than a desperate deal with a demon. That change makes Peter more sympathetic and the situation more tragic, because you cannot blame him for it. He did the right thing, and it cost him everything. But MJ and Ned are not the only people Peter needs to worry about in Brand New Day. Because while he has been dealing with his isolation and his mutation and his heartbreak, New York City's criminal underworld has been getting organized. And the villain lineup in this film is absolutely enormous. Let me walk you through the confirmed threats, because there are a lot of them, and each one brings something different to the table. First up is Scorpion, played by Michael Mando. Mac Gargan was first introduced all the way back in Spider-Man Homecoming in 2017. In the post-credits scene of that film, Gargan approached Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, in prison. Gargan had a scorpion tattoo on his neck and asked Toomes if he knew Spider-Man's real identity. Toomes lied, protecting Peter despite being his enemy, and Gargan walked away empty-handed. That was 9 years ago in real time. 9 years between introduction and payoff. And now Gargan is back, and he is not just a tattooed thug anymore. The trailer shows him in full scorpion armor, complete with an upgraded mechanical stinger tail. He looks absolutely menacing. Michael Mando is a tremendous actor, known for his terrifying performance as Voss in the Far Cry video game series and his work on Better Call Saul, and seeing him finally get to play the fully realized Scorpion is going to be incredible. Next is Tombstone, played by Marvin Jones III. Tombstone is a classic Spider-Man crime boss from the comics, known for his distinctive chalk-white skin, immense physical strength, and near invulnerability. He represents the organized crime element of Brand New Day's story. If the Punisher is the vigilante operating outside the law to punish criminals, Tombstone is the criminal empire that the Punisher is hunting. And Spider-Man is caught in the middle, trying to stop both of them without crossing the moral lines that the Punisher has already obliterated. Then there is the Hand, and this is where things get really interesting. The Hand is a mystical ninja clan and criminal organization that has deep roots in Marvel's street-level stories. They were featured prominently in the Netflix Marvel shows, particularly Daredevil and The Defenders, where they were presented as an ancient organization with supernatural abilities. The Defenders supposedly destroyed the Hand at the end of that series back in 2017, so their return in Brand New Day raises major questions. How did they survive? Where have they been? And more importantly, who is leading them now? The presence of the Hand also strongly suggests a connection to Daredevil. Matt Murdock already appeared in No Way Home as Peter's lawyer, and the Hand is his arch-nemesis organization. If the Hand is operating in New York and Spider-Man is fighting them, it seems almost certain that Daredevil will be involved in some capacity, even if it is just a brief appearance or a reference. Boomerang and Tarantula are also confirmed through the trailer, adding more bodies to the villain roster. Boomerang is a fun character from the comics who has actually been an ally of Spider-Man in some storylines, working alongside him despite being technically a criminal. Tarantula is a more straightforward villain, but his inclusion suggests that Brand New Day is pulling from deep Spider-Man comic lore. And then there is the Department of Damage Control, which functions as an antagonist institution rather than a traditional villain. Damage Control has been policing superhumans in the MCU since Spider-Man Homecoming, and in Brand New Day, they appear to be actively hunting mutants. If Sadie Sink's character is indeed a mutant, Damage Control's pursuit of her creates a secondary conflict that runs parallel to the criminal underworld storyline. There is a theory that all of these villains might be connected by a larger organizing force. In the original Brand New Day comics, one of the most significant new villains was Mr. Negative, also known as Martin Lee. Mr. Negative ran a criminal empire while maintaining a philanthropic public persona, using a dual identity that was both literal and figurative. He could switch between being a respected community leader and a ruthless crime lord. If you have played the 2018 Spider-Man PlayStation game, you know this character well because he was one of the primary antagonists. Some fans speculate that a similar puppet master figure could be operating behind the scenes in the film, pulling the strings that connect Scorpion, Tombstone, the Hand, and possibly even Sync's character into a single coordinated threat. Fun fact about the villain roster that I find genuinely amazing. Michael Mando's Scorpion has had the longest gap between MCU appearances of any confirmed returning character who is not a legacy casting. 9 years between Homecoming and Brand New Day. That is an extraordinarily long time to wait for a payoff, and it speaks to how far in advance Marvel plans these stories. They planted the seed in 2017 and are finally harvesting it in 2026. With all these threats converging on Peter at once, it is no wonder the Punisher told him he is losing it. Peter is isolated, mutating, grieving, and now he has to fight an entire army of villains while his powers are unstable and his mental state is deteriorating. He needs help, and he has found it in the last person you would expect, a man who does not even remember meeting him. Let's talk about Bruce Banner, because his inclusion in this film is one of the most surprising and potentially significant elements that the trailer revealed, and I think a lot of people are underestimating how important his role might be. Mark Ruffalo returns as Bruce Banner, and notably, he is in his human form. Not Smart Hulk, not Professor Hulk. Regular, human Bruce Banner. The last time we saw Bruce, he was operating as the merged Smart Hulk persona, having found a balance between his two identities that allowed him to maintain Banner's intelligence while using the Hulk's body. But in the Brand New Day trailer, he appears to be wearing a device on his right wrist that seems to control or suppress his Hulk transformations, which we last saw in She-Hulk Attorney at Law. Whatever happened between then and now, Bruce seems to have chosen or been forced to return to his purely human state. He also appears to be working as a professor at Empire State University, which is Peter Parker's traditional college in the comics. This is a lovely detail that grounds the film in comic book history, while also creating a natural reason for Peter to encounter Bruce. He is not seeking out the Hulk. He is seeking out a scientist, specifically the world's foremost expert on what happens when radiation rewrites human DNA. The scene in the trailer where Peter introduces himself to Bruce is quietly devastating. Peter walks up to this man who once fought alongside him in the biggest battle in the history of the universe, who watched him turn to dust during the snap and then welcomed him back during the final battle against Thanos. And Bruce just looks at him blankly. No recognition, no memory. Peter is meeting one of his former teammates for the first time, again, and he is the only one who knows it. He has to play the role of a stranger asking a professor for help with a medical condition, when in reality, he is a former Avenger whose DNA is tearing itself apart. Bruce examines Peter and delivers the grim diagnosis. If DNA is mutating, that would be enormously dangerous. It is a simple line, but coming from Bruce Banner, a man who knows more about dangerous mutations than anyone alive, it carries enormous weight. Bruce is not being dramatic. He is stating a scientific fact. What is happening to Peter could kill him. Now, here is where things get really interesting from a story perspective. In the other comic storyline, Peter specifically sought out Bruce Banner for the same reason. Banner was the expert on radioactive mutation, He understood better than anyone what happens when radiation fundamentally changes a human body, because it happened to him. He became the Hulk, and in the comics, Banner's analysis helped Peter understand what was happening to him, even if it could not stop the transformation. But there is a fan theory that goes further than just Banner being Peter's doctor. Some people at comicbook.com have suggested that Brand New Day might blend a classic Spider-Man transformation story with a Hulk subplot. In many Spider-Man comics, Peter has a scientist friend whose own transformation mirrors or contrasts with his. The most obvious example is Dr. Kurt Connors, who becomes the Lizard. But what if Brand New Day uses Bruce Banner in that role? What if, while trying to help Peter, something triggers Bruce's own transformation? What if the device on his wrist fails, or the stress of studying Peter's mutation somehow destabilizes his own condition? If Bruce Banner loses control and becomes the Hulk at a critical moment in the film, that adds an entirely new dimension of chaos to an already overwhelming situation. Spider-Man fighting Scorpion and Tombstone in the hand while simultaneously trying to contain an out-of-control Hulk would be absolute pandemonium, and it would create a beautiful dramatic irony. The person Peter turned to for help becomes another problem he has to solve. I also think there is something thematically powerful about Peter's relationship with Bruce in this film. Both of them are men defined by transformations they did not ask for. Both of them have spent their lives trying to control something inside them that could be destructive if left unchecked. And both of them know what it is like to be feared for what they are, rather than appreciated for who they are. Bruce understands Peter's situation on a level that almost no one else could, even without remembering their shared history. Fun fact, that puts this dynamic into perspective. This is the first time Spider-Man and the Hulk have shared significant one-on-one screen time in an MCU film. They have been in the same movies before, Infinity War and Endgame, but they never really had scenes together that were just about the two of them. Brand New Day is giving us something that fans have wanted for years, a genuine Spider-Man and Hulk dynamic, and the circumstances could not be more compelling. But Bruce Banner represents the scientific explanation for what is happening to Peter. And as we discussed earlier, there are strong hints that science alone does not tell the whole story. Which brings us to one of the most fascinating and potentially transformative elements of Brand New Day, the possibility that Spider-Man's powers have a mystical dimension that goes far beyond a radioactive spider bite. Since we are drifting into deeper waters now, and this is the part of the evening where the really wild ideas come out, let's talk about spider totems, the Great Weaver, and what it would mean for the MCU if Spider-Man's powers are not just scientific, but supernatural. The concept of spider totems was introduced by writer J. Michael Straczynski during his run on Amazing Spider-Man in the early 2000s. It was a fundamentally new idea about the nature of Spider-Man's powers, and it was initially very controversial. For decades, Peter Parker's abilities had been explained purely through science. Radioactive spider, genetic mutation, enhanced strength, speed, agility, wall crawling, and spider sense. It was all biology and physics, but Straczynski introduced a character named Ezekiel Sims, an older man with spider abilities similar to Peter's, who told Peter something that shook his understanding of everything. Ezekiel suggested that the radioactive spider that bit Peter did not give him his powers randomly. The spider chose Peter. It was dying from the radiation and, in its final moments, it passed on its mystical essence to a host it deemed worthy. Peter's powers were not an accident of science. They were a gift from a cosmic force. This force was connected to a concept called the web of life and destiny, a metaphysical structure that connects all spider-powered beings across every dimension of the multiverse. Each dimension has a spider totem, a being chosen by this cosmic web to serve as its defender. Peter Parker was Earth 616's totem, and his powers, while manifesting through biological changes, were ultimately mystical in origin. The Great Weaver is the deity associated with this mythology, a spider god that oversees the web of life and destiny and imbues chosen totems with their powers. In the other storyline, when Peter died and was reborn from the cocoon, it was the Great Weaver that facilitated his resurrection and granted him enhanced abilities. The rebirth was not a scientific process, it was a spiritual one. Peter had to accept his totemic nature, embrace the spider part of himself that he had always kept at arm's length, and in doing so, he was transformed. Now, why does this matter for Brand New Day? Because Keith David's mysterious voiceover in the trailer sounds distinctly mystical. His deep, resonant voice discusses spider life cycles and the concept of rebirth in language that feels more spiritual than scientific. If Bruce Banner represents the scientific perspective on Peter's mutation, Keith David's character might represent the mystical one. And if the film is introducing the spider totem mythology, that has enormous implications for the future of the MCU. First, it connects the MCU's Spider-Man to the Spider-Verse mythology that Sony has been building in their animated films. The Spider-Verse trilogy is built entirely on the concept of spider totems and the web of life and destiny. If Brand New Day establishes that the MCU's Peter Parker is a totem, it creates a bridge between the live-action and animated Spider-Man universes that could lead to truly spectacular crossovers in the future. Second, it sets up a whole new category of villains. The Inheritors are a family of supernatural predators who hunt spider totems across the multiverse, consuming their life force for sustenance. The most prominent inheritor is Morlun, who was the villain in the other storyline, and was responsible for Peter's death before his rebirth. If Brand New Day introduces totems, Morlun becomes a natural future villain, and he would be unlike anything the MCU has seen before. Not a mad scientist, not an alien warlord, not a corrupt businessman, a supernatural predator whose entire existence is dedicated to hunting and killing beings like Peter Parker. Third, and this is the part I find most fascinating, it adds a completely new dimension to a character who has always been defined by science. Tony Stark gave Peter his technology. Radioactive science gave Peter his powers. Everything in the MCU's Spider-Man has been grounded in the rational, the explainable, the scientific. Introducing a mystical element would fundamentally change who Peter Parker is. He would not just be a kid who got lucky with a spider bite. He would be chosen, destined, part of something ancient and cosmic that goes far beyond his individual story. And I think that evolution is exactly what Brand New Day is going for. The film seems to be blending both approaches. Bruce Banner provides the scientific framework. Keith David's character provides the mystical context. And Peter is caught between them, trying to understand whether he is experiencing a biological malfunction or a spiritual awakening. That tension between science and magic is actually one of the most interesting narrative choices the film could make, because it mirrors Peter's own internal conflict. Is he a scientist or a hero? Is he Peter Parker or Spider-Man? Is he human or something more? Fun fact that I think is really cool. The spider totem concept was created by J. Michael Straczynski, who is also the writer of Babylon 5 and a bunch of other brilliant science fiction. When he introduced the idea in the comics, he was very intentional about not completely overriding the scientific origin. He left it ambiguous. Maybe the spider chose Peter mystically. Or maybe the spider just bit him and the radiation did all the work, and Ezekiel was wrong about the supernatural stuff. Straczynski wanted readers to decide for themselves, and I think Brand New Day might do the same thing, giving us both explanations and letting the audience choose which one they believe. Now, Peter's transformation and the totem mythology do not exist in isolation. Brand New Day is part of a much larger story that Marvel has been telling across dozens of films and shows, and the connections between this film and the wider MCU are more significant than you might expect. Spider-Man Brand New Day does not exist in a vacuum. It is releasing as part of Phase 6 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, arriving in theaters just 2 months after Avengers Doomsday in May of 2026. And the connections between these projects and the wider MCU are more interesting than a lot of people have been discussing. Let's start with the timeline. Brand New Day is set in approximately 2028, 4 years after the events of No Way Home. That puts it further into the MCU timeline than almost anything we have seen before. And that gap raises questions about what has been happening in the world while Peter has been operating alone. The MCU has been through enormous upheavals. The Thunderbolts film dealt with the Sentry and the Void. Daredevil Born Again has been reshaping the street-level landscape of New York. The Fantastic Four have entered the picture. And Avengers Doomsday is presumably going to bring Doctor Doom into direct conflict with the heroes. There is a fascinating shot in the Brand New Day trailer that has led to a very specific theory about how the film connects to these other events. The recreation of Amazing Fantasy No. 15's cover, showing Spider-Man carrying a civilian while swinging through the city, has an overcast, almost apocalyptic backdrop. Some fans at comicbook.com have theorized that this shot is not from the main plot of Brand New Day at all, but from a montage showing what Spider-Man has been doing over the past 4 years. Specifically, they believe it might depict Spider-Man rescuing civilians during the Void's attack from Thunderbolts. If that is the case, it would explain the reported cameo from Florence Pugh's Yelena Belova in Brand New Day. Peter could have crossed paths with the Thunderbolts team during that crisis without anyone knowing who he was. Then there is the Damage Control situation. In the trailer, Damage Control appears to be actively hunting mutants, which is a massive development for the MCU. If this is the government's official response to the emergence of mutant-powered individuals, it sets up the persecution narrative that has always been central to the X-Men. And Brand New Day might be the film that introduces that dynamic to the wider MCU. With Sadie Sink's character as the catalyst, there is also the question of Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin. In Daredevil Born Again, Fisk became the mayor of New York City. But the Brand New Day trailer shows Spider-Man receiving a key to the city from a female mayor, which strongly suggests that Fisk has been removed from power by the time this film takes place. That is a significant plot development that connects Brand New Day directly to the events of Born Again and suggests that the street-level MCU is moving as one interconnected narrative rather than a collection of separate stories. Looking further ahead, Brand New Day is clearly positioning Peter Parker for a major role in Avengers Secret Wars, which is scheduled for 2027. If Peter emerges from this film with enhanced abilities from his mutation, reconnected relationships, and experience fighting an army of villains simultaneously, he will be one of the most capable and battle-tested heroes in the MCU. With the original Avengers roster depleted, Iron Man dead, Captain America retired, Black Widow gone, and the Hulk apparently depowered, Spider-Man could genuinely become the central hero of the next era of the MCU. Tom Holland has been coy about his future in the franchise, but the fact that Brand New Day is being treated as the first chapter of something new rather than the final chapter of something old, suggests that Marvel has long-term plans for this version of Spider-Man. Holland described the film as a rebirth, and I think he meant that in every possible sense, not just for Peter Parker within the story, but for the franchise itself. This is where Spider-Man stops being the kid who needs mentoring and starts being the hero who mentors others. And that evolution is incredibly exciting. For years, the MCU's Spider-Man has been defined by his relationship to other heroes. He was Tony Stark's protege. He was part of the Avengers. He fought alongside gods and super soldiers and sorcerers. But in Brand New Day, for the first time, he is entirely on his own. No Stark technology, no Avengers backup, no mentor to call when things get bad. Just Peter Parker, his homemade suit, and whatever new abilities his mutation grants him. If he succeeds, he does it himself. And that is what makes a character worthy of leading the next generation of the MCU. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Before we think about where Spider-Man goes after Brand New Day, let's have some fun with the wilder theories that have been circulating through the fandom, because some of these are absolutely mental, and they are all entertaining to think about, even the ones that are almost certainly wrong. The first wild theory, and honestly the one that makes me laugh the most because the MCU fandom has been burned by this so many times, is the Mephisto theory. In the original One More Day comics, Peter Parker made a literal deal with Mephisto, Marvel's version of the devil, to save Aunt May's life. In exchange, Mephisto erased Peter's marriage to Mary Jane from existence. It was one of the most hated storylines in Spider-Man history because it felt like a cheat, like the writers just could not be bothered to come up with a better way to undo Peter's marriage. And now, some fans are wondering if Brand New Day will adapt this element. The theory goes like this. Aunt May is dead in the MCU. She was killed by the Green Goblin in No Way Home. What if Peter, desperate and alone and mutating, seeks out a supernatural solution? What if Mephisto appears and offers to bring May back in exchange for something Peter values? It would be a dark, morally complex storyline that would test Peter's character in a completely new way. And MCU fans have been expecting Mephisto to show up for years now. During WandaVision's run, the entire internet was convinced that Mephisto was behind everything. He was supposed to be in Loki. He was supposed to be in Doctor Strange. The fandom has been waiting for this devil to appear, and a Spider-Man film dealing with deals and sacrifices and the erasure of memory would actually be a perfect place for him. That said, I think this is extremely unlikely. The MCU's version of the memory wipe was Peter's selfless choice, not a selfish deal. And introducing Mephisto as the actual architect behind it would undermine the emotional power of No Way Home's ending. But it is fun to think about. The second wild theory involves the symbiote. At the end of Venom Let There Be, Carnage's post-credit scene, a piece of the Venom symbiote was left behind in the MCU universe when Eddie Brock was pulled back to his own dimension. That tiny drop of alien goo is still out there somewhere. And some fans believe that Peter's mutation might not be purely spider-based. What if the symbiote has found its way to Peter? What if the organic webbing, the enhanced abilities, the black eyes, all of it is not just Peter's spider DNA evolving, but the symbiote bonding with him? This would set up the Black Suit storyline, one of the most iconic Spider-Man stories ever told, where Peter acquires an alien suit that enhances his powers, but also amplifies his aggression and darker impulses. The black suit eventually becomes Venom when it bonds with a new host. And that story has been the foundation for some of Spider-Man's greatest comics and films. If Brand New Day is seeding that storyline, even subtly, it would be an absolutely massive development. Again, I think this is a stretch for this particular film. The mutation storyline seems clearly connected to the other, and the spider totem mythology rather than the symbiote. But the symbiote is still out there in the MCU, and eventually it will find its way to Peter. Maybe Brand New Day plants the seed for that encounter without actually going there yet. The third wild theory involves the Jackal and cloning. In the comics, Miles Warren, the Jackal, is a geneticist obsessed with Peter Parker who creates clones of him, leading to the infamous Clone Saga. Some fans have speculated that Sadie Sink's character knowing Peter's identity could be explained by cloning or genetic experimentation. If someone has been studying Peter's DNA, perhaps from samples collected during his time at Hawkins' lab, or from remnants of Stark's files, they could have created someone with a connection to Peter that bypasses the memory spell. It is a wild idea, but the Clone Saga is one of Spider-Man's most famous, if controversial, storylines, and adapting elements of it would certainly be bold. The fourth theory is that Doctor Strange's spell is breaking down, not because of some external attack, but because the spell was always unstable. Remember, Peter's constant interruptions during the casting fractured the magic. Strange patched it together, but maybe the patch is not permanent. Maybe the spell is slowly degrading, and over the 4 years since it was cast, tiny cracks have been forming. Memories are seeping through. MJ's obsession with Spider-Man photographs, Sink's character knowing Peter's identity, maybe even Peter's mutation, his body reacting to the instability of the spell that rewrote his very existence. If the spell is failing, that opens up enormous possibilities. People could start remembering Peter in fragments, getting flashes of a person they cannot quite place. The confusion and disorientation of partial memory restoration could be played for both comedy and heartbreak, and it would create a natural endgame for the film. Peter does not need to find a way to break the spell. He needs to decide whether to let it break on its own, and whether the consequences of people remembering him are worth the danger it would bring. Here is a fun fact that I love about fan theories in general. Kevin Erdman of Screen Rant pointed out that the original One More Day and Brand New Day comic storylines were deeply controversial because they reverted Spider-Man's character growth and relationships. Fans felt like years of development had been erased for the sake of returning the character to a simpler status quo. But Erdman argued that the MCU film could follow a similar storyline without making the same mistake, specifically because the MCU's version of the memory wipe was a sacrifice, not a reset. Peter chose this. He grew into it. And whatever happens in Brand New Day, it will build on that choice rather than undo it. There is also a completely bonkers theory that I have seen floating around online that I want to mention just because it is entertaining. Some fans believe that the entire Brand New Day film is secretly a setup for Spider-Man to join the X-Men. The logic goes like this. Peter's DNA is mutating. Damage Control is hunting mutants. If the MCU classifies Peter's spider abilities as a mutation rather than the result of a radioactive spider bite, he technically qualifies as a mutant. And if the X-Men are being formed in response to mutant persecution by Damage Control, Peter could end up being recruited or at least allied with them. It is a wild interpretation, and I am almost certain the film will not go in this direction. But the idea of Spider-Man on an X-Men roster is undeniably fun to imagine. I think the truth is going to be more emotionally grounded than most of these wild theories suggest. Brand New Day is clearly a character study as much as it is an action film. The real story is not about mutations or villains or mystical spider gods. It is about Peter Parker learning to live again after losing everything. It is about a man who has been hiding from his own humanity for 4 years, being forced to confront what that isolation has done to him, both physically and emotionally. And it is about the fundamental Spider-Man truth that you cannot do this alone, not forever. You need people. You need connection. You need love. Peter Parker has always been the hero who carries the weight of the world on his shoulders while pretending he is fine. Brand New Day seems to be the film that finally shows us what happens when that weight becomes too much to carry alone. And the answer, based on everything we have seen, is that it transforms you, literally. But that transformation does not have to be destruction. A cocoon is not a tomb. It is a place of change, and what emerges from it might be something beautiful. Now, since we are settling in for the longer stretch of the evening and things are getting cozy, I want to take some time to really explore the comic book history that Brand New Day is drawing from, because understanding where these stories come from makes the film so much richer. And honestly, the history of Spider-Man's Brand New Day era in the comics is one of the most fascinating and divisive chapters in superhero publishing. Let me take you back to 2007. At that point, Spider-Man was in a very different place in the comics than he is today. Peter Parker was married to Mary Jane Watson. They had been married since 1987, a full 20 years of comic book history showing them as a couple. Peter had publicly revealed his identity as Spider-Man during the Civil War event, siding with Tony Stark's pro-registration faction and unmasking on live television. It was a massive, world-changing moment, but it had consequences. The Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, put out a hit on Peter's family, and Aunt May was shot by a sniper. She was dying, and Peter was desperate. Enter One More Day, a storyline written by J. Michael Straczynski and editor-in-chief Joe Quesada. In this story, Peter and Mary Jane are approached by Mephisto, who offers them a deal. He will save Aunt May's life, but in exchange, he will erase their marriage from existence. Not just end it, erase it, as if it never happened. Peter and Mary Jane would go back to being just friends. They would not remember being married. Nobody would. Mary Jane, in a heartbreaking moment of sacrifice, agrees to the deal. She whispers something to Mephisto that Peter cannot hear, and reality rewrites itself. Aunt May survives. Peter and MJ are no longer married. The world forgets that Peter is Spider-Man. Everything resets. Fans were furious. One More Day is widely regarded as one of the most controversial and disliked storylines in Marvel Comics history. The idea that Peter Parker, a character defined by personal responsibility, would make a deal with the literal devil to avoid the consequences of his actions felt fundamentally wrong to many readers. It felt like the writers were taking the easy way out, hitting a cosmic reset button instead of telling a more challenging story about Peter dealing with the fallout of his public unmasking. But what came after One More Day was actually quite good. Brand New Day launched in January of 2008 in Amazing Spider-Man issue 546, and it ran for over 100 issues through to issue 647. During this era, Amazing Spider-Man became the sole Spider-Man title, publishing 3 times a month instead of the usual once, and it featured a rotating team of writers, including Dan Slott, Mark Guggenheim, and others. The status quo of Brand New Day was essentially a soft reboot. Peter was single again, living in a modest apartment, working part-time and struggling to make ends meet. His secret identity was restored, with the world vaguely remembering that Spider-Man had unmasked during Civil War. but unable to recall whose face was under the mask. Harry Osborn was alive again, having been living in Europe for several years. Aunt May was healthy and volunteering at a homeless shelter. And Peter's love life was complicated, with multiple potential romantic interests and no clear path forward. The Brand New Day era introduced several important new characters and concepts. Mr. Negative, also known as Martin Lee, was a major new villain with the ability to corrupt people with his touch, turning them into twisted versions of themselves. The Menace, later revealed to be Lily Hollister, Harry Osborn's girlfriend, who had secretly been using a variant of the Goblin formula. There were the Spider Tracer murders, a mystery where dead criminals were found with Spider-Man's tracking devices on them, framing him as a killer. And there was the ongoing question of what exactly Mephisto's deal had changed about reality, because the full extent of the rewrite was never entirely clear. What I find most interesting about the original Brand New Day comics is how they handled Peter's emotional state. Despite the cosmic reset, Peter still felt like something was missing. He could not articulate what it was. He did not remember being married to MJ. But there was an absence, a hollow space in his life that he could feel, but not explain. And when he eventually encountered Mary Jane again, there was this incredible tension between them. A recognition without understanding. A connection that transcended memory. The MCU's Brand New Day seems to be mining exactly this emotional territory, but with even higher stakes. In the comics, both Peter and MJ forgot their marriage. In the film, Peter remembers everything. He knows exactly what he lost. He remembers every moment with MJ and Ned. He remembers the good times and the bad times and the terrifying times, and he has to carry all of that alone, surrounded by people who do not share those memories and never will. There is a moment in the Brand New Day comics that fans have been hoping the film will adapt. Peter encounters Mary Jane and asks, "Do I know you?" She replies, "We've met. In another life." It is 6 words that contain an entire relationship, the weight of everything they were, reduced to a half-remembered feeling. If the film includes something like this, I think it will be one of the most emotionally powerful moments in the entire MCU. The Brand New Day era in the comics eventually led to some truly excellent storylines. The Gauntlet arc saw Spider-Man's classic villains return one by one, each upgraded and more dangerous than before, wearing Peter down over a series of brutal encounters. The Grim Hunt storyline, which lived up to its name, saw the resurrection of Kraven the Hunter and dealt with death and sacrifice in ways that felt genuinely shocking. And Dan Slott's subsequent run built on Brand New Day's foundation to create the superior Spider-Man saga, one of the most inventive and daring Spider-Man stories ever told, where Dr. Octopus took over Peter's body and tried to prove he could be a better Spider-Man than Peter ever was. I bring all of this up because I think the MCU's Brand New Day is not just borrowing a title, it is borrowing a philosophy. The original comics used the reset as an opportunity to strip Peter Parker down to his essentials and rebuild him from the ground up. No marriage, no Avengers membership, no public identity, no resources. Just Peter, his powers, and his relentless determination to do the right thing. And that is exactly what the film is doing. No Way Home stripped everything away. Brand New Day is where Peter starts to build something new. Now, speaking of building something new, I want to spend some time thinking about who Peter Parker is at this point in his journey, because I think his character development across these films is actually one of the most impressive arcs in the entire MCU, even if people do not always give it the credit it deserves. When we first met Tom Holland's Peter Parker in Captain America: Civil War back in 2016, He was a 15-year-old kid from Queens who was beside himself with excitement about meeting Tony Stark and fighting alongside the Avengers. He was enthusiastic, naive, desperate to prove himself, and absolutely not ready for the reality of what being a hero actually meant. In Homecoming, he learned the difference between wanting to be an Avenger and actually being a responsible hero. Tony Stark took away his fancy suit, and Peter had to figure out who Spider-Man was without the technology. He fought the Vulture in a homemade outfit and won through courage and determination rather than Stark technology. In Far From Home, Peter was dealing with the aftermath of Tony Stark's death and the weight of being seen as Iron Man's successor. He just wanted to be a normal teenager on a school trip with his crush, but the universe kept pulling him back into hero duty. He was manipulated by Mysterio, nearly killed, and eventually had to build his own suit from scratch aboard a Stark jet, symbolically stepping out of Tony's shadow and becoming his own hero. But then, Mysterio exposed his identity to the world, and everything changed. No Way Home was the crucible. Peter lost his anonymity, his freedom, his aunt, and eventually every person who knew and loved him. He fought alongside two other versions of himself, saw what Spider-Man could become at his best and worst, and made the ultimate sacrifice to save reality. He asked for his own erasure. He chose to be forgotten. And now, in Brand New Day, we have a Peter Parker who is completely alone in a way that no other MCU hero has ever been. Steve Rogers had Sam and Bucky. Tony had Pepper and Rhodey. Thor had the Guardians. Even the most isolated heroes in the MCU have had at least one person who knew their struggle and stood by them. Peter has no one, zero connections, zero support, zero comfort. He is carrying an impossible burden entirely on his own, and he has been doing it for 4 years. That kind of prolonged isolation changes a person. And I think Brand New Day is going to show us exactly how it has changed Peter. The mutation is the physical manifestation, but there must be psychological changes too. 4 years of suppressing his own needs, ignoring his own pain, pouring everything he has into protecting a city that does not know his name. He has probably stopped thinking of himself as Peter Parker entirely. He is just Spider-Man now. And that loss of identity, that erasure of his own humanity, might be what is causing his body to respond the way it is. He is becoming more Spider because he has stopped being enough human. This is what makes the Punisher's line so significant. "You're losing it, kid." Frank Castle recognizes what he is seeing because he has lived it. After Frank's family was murdered, he stopped being Frank Castle and became the Punisher. He shed his humanity and became a weapon. And now, he is watching a young man walk the same path. And maybe, just maybe, some part of him wants to warn Peter before it is too late. I think the emotional arc of Brand New Day will be Peter rediscovering his humanity, not through gaining new powers or defeating villains, but through connection, through letting people in again, through admitting that he cannot do this alone and that trying to do it alone is literally killing him. MJ, Ned, Bruce Banner, maybe even the Punisher in his own harsh way. These people will pull Peter back from the edge, not because they remember who he was, but because they see who he is right now, a good man who is drowning, and they choose to help him anyway. That is a beautiful story. And it is uniquely Spider-Man, because Spider-Man has always been the hero who thinks he has to carry everything by himself, who pushes people away to protect them, who sacrifices his own happiness because he believes the world's safety depends on his suffering. And Brand New Day might finally be the story that teaches him the lesson he has needed to learn since the beginning. You do not have to suffer alone. Accepting help is not weakness, and the people who love you are not better off without you, no matter how dangerous your life might be. Peter Parker has spent 4 years believing that the noblest thing he could do was disappear. Brand New Day might be the story where he finally learns that the bravest thing he can do is come back. Tom Holland has played this character across 7 MCU appearances over nearly a decade now. He was 19 when he first appeared in Civil War in 2016 and will be 30 when Brand New Day releases. Peter Parker has literally grown up on screen alongside the audience. The kid who was doing backflips in his bedroom in Queens, giddy about fighting Captain America, is now a man alone in a dark apartment, watching his body transform into something he does not understand. That arc, from wide-eyed teenager to haunted young adult, is one of the most complete and compelling character journeys in superhero cinema. And I think that is why people are so invested in Brand New Day. It is not just about the action, or the villains, or the mutations. It is about a character we have watched grow up, a character we care about, a character who deserves happiness and keeps sacrificing it for the greater good. And finally, after everything he has been through, we want to see him find his way back to the light. Fun fact that puts this whole journey into perspective. When Tom Holland was first cast as Spider-Man, he was the youngest actor to ever play the character in a major film. He has now been playing Peter Parker longer than any other live-action Spider-Man. Tobey Maguire played the role across 3 films from 2002 to 2007, a span of 5 years. Andrew Garfield played it across 2 films from 2012 to 2014. Tom Holland's tenure stretches from 2016 to 2026, a full 10 years, and Brand New Day is his 7th appearance. He has not just played Spider-Man, he has defined Spider-Man for an entire generation. Now, as we settle into the final stretch of our evening together, I want to bring everything we have discussed into focus and talk about what I actually think is going to happen in Spider-Man Brand New Day. Not just the theories and speculation, but my genuine predictions based on everything we know, everything the trailer has shown us, and everything the comic book source material suggests. Let's start with Peter's mutation, because that is the backbone of the film. I believe Peter's transformation will follow the broad strokes of the other storyline from the comics, but adapted significantly for the MCU. He will experience a period of terrifying instability where his powers spiral out of control. The organic webbing, the heightened senses, the cocoon, the black eyes, all of it will escalate throughout the first and second acts of the film, making it increasingly difficult for him to function as Spider-Man. Bruce Banner will try to help from a scientific perspective, analyzing Peter's DNA and attempting to find a medical solution, but the science will not be enough on its own. At some point, probably during the second act, Peter will reach a crisis point. His body will push toward a full man-spider transformation, the point of no return where his human DNA is overwhelmed by his spider DNA. He will be on the brink of losing himself entirely. And this is where I think the mystical element will come in. Keith David's character, whoever he turns out to be, will offer Peter a different kind of understanding. Not a cure, but an acceptance. Peter will need to stop fighting the spider and start embracing it, not letting it consume him, but integrating it into who he is. Accepting that he is not just Peter Parker with spider powers. He is something new, something that is both human and spider, neither fully one nor the other, but something greater than either alone. The cocoon is the key image. It is not a prison. It is a place of transformation. Peter enters the cocoon as one thing and emerges as something else. And what he emerges as will be stronger, more powerful, and more in control than he has ever been. Organic webbing, enhanced senses, potentially new abilities like night vision or vibration sensing, but also, crucially, a deeper understanding of who and what he is. The mutation is not a disease to be cured. It is an evolution to be embraced, and that acceptance is what saves him. I think the mutation storyline will resolve by the end of the second act or early in the third act, giving Peter his full new power set in time for the final battle. He will still be Peter Parker. He will not become a monster, but he will be changed permanently, and those changes will carry forward into future films. As for the MJ and Ned storyline, here is what I think happens. For most of the film, Peter maintains his distance. He watches them from afar. He suffers in silence. But as his mutation worsens and his situation becomes more desperate, circumstances will force him into proximity with MJ. Maybe he needs to protect her from one of the villains. Maybe his powers go haywire near her apartment and she finds him. Maybe she tracks Spider-Man down because her obsessive collection of Spider-Man photos has led her to notice patterns that only someone paying very close attention would see. However it happens, MJ will learn that Spider-Man is Peter Parker, not because the spell breaks, but because she figures it out, because that is who MJ is. She is the smartest, most observant person in any room, and even without her memories, she is drawn to Peter for reasons she cannot explain. She will not get her memories back, at least not in this film. But she will choose to know Peter. She will choose to be part of his life. And that choice, made freely and without the burden of past trauma, is actually more powerful than a magical restoration of memory would be. MJ choosing Peter twice, falling for him twice. That is the most romantic thing I can imagine this film doing, and I think that is exactly where they are going. Ned will probably be secondary to MJ's arc, but I expect he will also reconnect with Peter by the end of the film. Maybe MJ brings Ned back into the fold after she learns the truth. Maybe Ned independently discovers something that leads him to Peter. Either way, the trio will be reunited by the credits, changed and scarred, but together again. Now, the villains. I think the film is structured as a rising tide of threats that all converge in the third act. Scorpion is probably the primary physical antagonist, the villain Peter fights in the climactic battle. His 9-year wait for payoff since Homecoming demands a significant role, and Michael Mando is too good an actor to waste on a minor appearance. Tombstone provides the organized crime backdrop, representing the criminal empire that the various smaller villains work for or are connected to. The Hand adds a mystical threat that ties into Daredevil's world and creates the possibility of Matt Murdock appearing, even briefly. Sadie Sink's character will initially seem like a villain, but will be revealed as something more complex. If she is Jean Grey, she is probably a young mutant who has been hunted by damage control and is lashing out with her powers in self-defense. Her mind control abilities make her seem dangerous, but she is actually scared and desperate, much like Peter was when he first got his powers. Peter recognizing a kindred spirit in her, another superpowered person who is isolated and afraid, could be one of the film's most moving moments. He would see in her a reflection of his own loneliness and choose to help her rather than fight her. The Punisher will weave through the entire film as a wild card. He and Spider-Man will clash physically at least once, probably twice, but they will also have quieter moments of reluctant respect. Frank Castle will push Peter to confront things about himself that he has been avoiding. And in the final battle, I think Castle will fight alongside Spider-Man, not because he has changed his philosophy about killing criminals, but because the situation is dire enough that even the Punisher recognizes they need to work together. It will be an uneasy alliance, and it probably will not last beyond this film. But for one moment, Spider-Man and the Punisher will stand on the same side. As for how the film ends, I think we will get something that is hopeful but earned. Peter will have survived his mutation and emerged stronger. He will have reconnected with MJ and Ned, at least to the extent that they know who he is and choose to be in his life again. He will have new powers and a new understanding of what it means to be Spider-Man. But the world at large still does not remember Peter Parker. The spell is still in effect for the vast majority of people. Peter's anonymity remains intact, which is actually what he needs right now. He can be Spider-Man without the public identity drama that nearly destroyed his life in Far From Home and No Way Home. The final shot of the film, if I had to guess, will mirror the final shot of No Way Home, but with a crucial difference. In No Way Home, Peter swung through New York alone, anonymous, isolated, determined, but heartbroken. In Brand New Day, Peter will swing through New York, anonymous to the world, but no longer alone. MJ and Ned will be there, maybe not swinging alongside him, but waiting for him, knowing who he is, choosing to be part of his life despite the danger. The suit will be the same, but the man inside it will be different. More powerful, yes, but also more connected, more human, more whole. A brand new day, not just for Spider-Man, but for Peter Parker. Before we start to wind down for the evening, I want to share a few more smaller theories and fun observations that did not quite fit into our main discussion, but are too interesting to leave out. There is the theory about Tremel Tillman's character. Tillman, who is absolutely phenomenal as the sinister Milnick in Severance, has been confirmed in a role called Bill in Brand New Day. Nobody knows who Bill is. There is no obvious Bill in Spider-Man's comic book history who matches what we have seen. Some fans think he might be a new character created specifically for the film. Others speculate he could be an alias for a known Marvel character whose real identity is being hidden, similar to how Benedict Cumberbatch's casting as Khan in Star Trek Into Darkness was concealed behind a fake character name. Given Tillman's incredible ability to play characters who seem pleasant on the surface but harbor something deeply unsettling underneath, I would not be surprised if Bill turns out to be someone much more significant than the name suggests. There is also the question of what happened to Happy Hogan. Jon Favreau played Happy across multiple MCU films and was last seen as a significant supporting character in No Way Home, where Peter visited him at Aunt May's grave. Happy did not recognize Peter because of the spell, but he was still grieving May. In Brand New Day, Happy appears to be absent, which has led some fans to wonder if something happened to him in the intervening years, or if he has simply moved on from his connection to the Spider-Man orbit now that he does not remember Peter. The recreational stuff is interesting too. Destin Daniel Cretton is apparently recreating several iconic comic book covers within the film. We have already discussed Amazing Fantasy number 15 from 1962 and Amazing Spider-Man number 129 from 1974, the Punisher's debut. But there are reportedly other covers being recreated as well, including Amazing Spider-Man number 134 from 1974 and Amazing Spider-Man number 345 from 1991. Each of these covers tells us something about the film's content. Issue 134 featured the first appearance of the tarantula, confirming that villain's role. Issue 345 featured a story where Spider-Man was hunted through New York City, which could hint at an extended chase sequence in the film. Michael Giacchino is returning as composer, which is wonderful news. His Spider-Man themes have been consistently excellent, and having musical continuity with the previous trilogy, while also reflecting the darker, more mature tone of Brand New Day, should produce something really special. Giacchino has a gift for combining heroism with melancholy, which is exactly what this film needs. Here is a production detail that I find quite touching. Tom Holland apparently suffered a concussion during filming, and production was paused for about a week to allow him to recover before resuming. The fact that they stopped production rather than working around it speaks to how much Holland means to this franchise. He is not just the star, he is Spider-Man, and they were not going to risk his health to maintain a schedule. There is one more theory I want to mention, and it is one that I personally find really compelling. Some fans believe that Brand New Day will end with a scene that sets up a Spider-Man team. Not just Peter alone, but Peter with allies. If Sadie Sink is playing a character with powers, whether Jean Grey or Firestar or someone else entirely, she could become an ally by the end of the film. Combined with Peter's existing relationship with the Punisher and his potential connection to Daredevil through the Hand subplot, Brand New Day could be the beginning of a street-level team that forms the backbone of the MCU's next phase. Spider-Man, Daredevil, the Punisher, and a powerful young woman with abilities beyond their understanding. That sounds like an incredible foundation for future stories. And that, my dear friends, is where I think we should start to wind down for the evening. We have covered an enormous amount of ground tonight. We talked about Peter Parker's devastating isolation and the emotional cost of Doctor Strange's spell. We explored his mysterious mutation, the cocoon, the organic webbing, the black eyes, and the comic book storylines that the film is drawing from. We dove deep into the mystery of Sadie Sink's character and the evidence for each of the major theories. We discussed the Punisher's complicated dynamic with Spider-Man and what Frank Castle's presence means for the film's moral landscape. We explored whether MJ and Ned will remember Peter and what their reunion might look like. We broke down the stacked villain lineup, from Scorpion's 9-year return to the Hand's surprising resurrection. We talked about Bruce Banner's role as Peter's reluctant scientific advisor. We got into the deep mythology of spider totems and the Great Weaver. We connected Brand New Day to the wider MCU and speculated about its implications for Secret Wars and beyond. And we entertained some absolutely wild theories about Mephisto, symbiotes, clones, and mutant classification. Through all of it, one thing has remained constant. Spider-Man Brand New Day is a story about a man who lost everything and chose to keep going anyway. It is about the cost of heroism and the price of isolation. It is about a body that is changing, and a heart that is breaking, and a spirit that refuses to surrender. It is about Peter Parker, the kid from Queens who became the most selfless hero in the multiverse, finally learning that he does not have to do this alone. I think this film is going to be something special, not just because of the action, or the villains, or the mutation storyline, though all of that looks incredible, but because it is telling a deeply human story about loneliness, connection, sacrifice, and renewal. Those are universal themes that resonate whether you are a lifelong Spider-Man fan or someone who has never picked up a comic book. We all know what it feels like to be alone. We all know what it feels like to carry a burden that seems too heavy. And we all know what it feels like when someone reaches out a hand and says, "You don't have to do this by yourself." That is what Spider-Man has always been about. Not the powers, or the costume, or the web swinging. It is about a fundamentally good person who keeps choosing to help others even when it costs him everything. And Brand New Day might be the film that finally gives Peter Parker the thing he has been denying himself since the very beginning: a life. A real, full, connected life with people who know who he is and love him anyway. Spider-Man Brand New Day swings into theaters on July the 31st, 2026. And honestly, I cannot wait. In future videos, I am definitely going to cover more Spider-Man topics. Deep dives into the complete MCU Spider-Man timeline, character analyses of the villains, and how they compare to their comic book counterparts. A full breakdown of the other storyline for people who want to understand the comic book source material in detail. And of course, once the film actually releases, I will be here to discuss every twist, every surprise, and every moment that made us cry. But until then, wherever you are tonight, whether you are lying in bed, curled up on the couch, or just winding down after a long day, I hope this helped you drift off to something interesting. Spider-Man's story is far from over. In fact, it might just be getting started. Stay safe, stay cozy, and sweet dreams. I will see you in the next one. Actually, before we fully wrap up, there are a couple more things I want to touch on. Some fun theories that are probably wrong but are just too entertaining not to talk about, and a few reflections on what makes Spider-Man so enduring as a character that I think are worth sharing before we call it a night. First, the Eddie Munson theory. Wait, wrong franchise. I mean the Daredevil appearance theory. Given that the Hand appears in the Brand New Day trailer, and Matt Murdock already appeared in No Way Home as Peter's lawyer, there is very strong speculation that Charlie Cox will make an appearance in this film. It would not need to be a major role. Even a single scene where Daredevil shows up during a fight against the Hand, nods at Spider-Man, and disappears into the night would be enough to send fans into absolute orbit. The filmmakers reportedly coordinated closely with the Daredevil Born Again creative team to ensure continuity between the properties. And Brad Winderbaum, the head of Marvel Television, said they wanted to highlight that these stories exist in the same world. A brief Daredevil appearance would be the perfect way to deliver on that promise without overwhelming Brand New Day's own narrative. There is also the question of whether we will see any reference to the other Spider-Men. Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield both appeared in No Way Home, and their presence was one of the most celebrated moments in the entire MCU. Now, the memory spell means they would not remember Peter either, and they exist in their own universes, so a direct appearance is unlikely. But what if Brand New Day includes a subtle reference? A news report about a spider-themed hero spotted in another city. A brief flash during Peter's mutation where he sees visions of his multiversal counterparts. Or even just Peter in a moment of quiet reflection, thinking about the other two Spider-Men he fought alongside and wondering if they are doing okay. It would be a beautiful piece of continuity that acknowledges No Way Home's legacy without overwhelming Brand New Day's fresh start. There is another thing the trailer revealed that I have not seen enough people talking about: Peter's new costume. In the suit teaser that Sony released on Spider-Man Day in August of 2025, we got our first look at Brand New Day's Spider-Man suit. It has comics-accurate red and blue colors with raised webbing on the surface, very similar to the webbing on Tobey Maguire's suit from the Raimi films. The fabric has a faint hexagonal webbing design that carries over from Holland's previous suits, but the overall aesthetic is much more classic and textured. It feels like a deliberate combination of all three live-action Spider-Man designs, which is poetically appropriate for a Peter Parker who met and fought alongside his other selves. He is carrying their influence into his new chapter, even if he is the only one who remembers. The suit also represents something important about Peter's character in this era. It is entirely his own creation. No Stark technology, No billion-dollar nanotechnology. No AI assistant or integrated weapons systems. Just a well-made suit stitched together by a man with extraordinary intelligence and very limited resources. In Homecoming, Tony Stark took away Peter's fancy suit, and he had to be Spider-Man in pajamas and a hoodie. That was the film where Peter learned that the suit does not make the hero. Now, in Brand New Day, Peter has built something that is entirely his. It is beautiful and functional and classic, but it is also humble. It says everything about where Peter Parker is as a person. He does not need Stark technology to be Spider-Man. He just needs to be himself. I also want to take a moment to appreciate the creative team behind this film, because I think they deserve more credit than they have been getting. Destin Daniel Cretton is a genuinely brilliant filmmaker. Before Shang-Chi, he directed Short Term 12, one of the most emotionally raw and powerful indie films of the last decade, a story about counselors working with at-risk youth that deals with trauma, resilience, and the healing power of human connection. Those themes map perfectly onto Spider-Man Brand New Day. Peter is a traumatized young person who needs connection to heal. Cretton understands that kind of story on a deep level, and I think his sensibility is exactly what this film needs. He is not just a director who can stage spectacular action sequences, though he can certainly do that. He is a storyteller who cares about the emotional truth of his characters. Chris McKenna and Eric Summers, the writers, have been with the MCU Spider-Man franchise since the beginning. They wrote Homecoming, Far From Home, and No Way Home. They know these characters inside and out, and based on interviews, they spent a long time cracking the story for Brand New Day. Tom Holland said in October of 2024 that the script was finally cracked, suggesting that they went through numerous drafts and iterations before finding the right approach. That kind of dedication to getting the story right, rather than rushing to meet a deadline, gives me enormous confidence in the final product. And Michael Giacchino's return as composer is the cherry on top. His Spider-Man themes have been beautiful throughout the trilogy, and the prospect of him scoring Peter's most emotionally complex and dramatically ambitious adventure yet is incredibly exciting. Giacchino has a knack for making you feel things through music that you might not be ready to feel. His score for Up's opening sequence, his work on Ratatouille, his theme for Doctor Strange. The man understands how to break your heart with a melody, and Brand New Day is going to give him plenty of material to work with. Now, one final thought before we truly call it a night. I have been thinking about why Spider-Man endures. Why, after more than 60 years of comics, cartoons, video games, and films, this character remains the most popular superhero in the world. Not the most powerful, not the most impressive, the most popular. And I think the answer is surprisingly simple. Spider-Man is us. He is not a billionaire genius in a suit of armor. He is not a Norse god wielding cosmic power. He is not a super soldier frozen in time. He is a regular person who was given extraordinary abilities and chose to use them to help others, even when it meant sacrificing his own happiness, his own safety, and his own life. He worries about money. He struggles with relationships. He makes mistakes and feels guilty about them. He gets overwhelmed and stressed and scared. But he keeps going. He always keeps going. That is why Peter Parker resonates with people across generations and cultures and backgrounds. Because we all know what it feels like to be overwhelmed by responsibility. We all know what it feels like to carry a burden that seems too heavy. And we all admire the idea that someone could face that burden and choose to bear it anyway. Not because they have to, but because it is the right thing to do. Brand New Day is taking that fundamental Spider-Man truth and pushing it to its absolute limit. What happens when the burden becomes too much? What happens when the isolation breaks you? What happens when your body starts to rebel against the impossible demands you have placed on it? And most importantly, what happens when you finally let someone help? I think the answer is transformation. Not just physical, but spiritual and emotional. Peter Parker is going to emerge from Brand New Day as a different person. Not worse, not broken, but changed, evolved. A man who has been through the cocoon and come out the other side. And that is a story worth telling. That is a story worth watching. And if you ask me, that is a story worth falling asleep to. Thank you for spending the evening with me, my dear adventurers. It has been a proper pleasure, as always. Sweet dreams. Oh, and one more thing before I go. If you are still awake and this video helped you relax, even a little bit, consider dropping a like, leaving a comment with your own Brand New Day theories, and subscribing so you do not miss our next deep dive. I have got loads more planned for the coming weeks and months. We will be covering the complete history of Spider-Man's villains, from the original Sinister Six to the modern era. We will do a full timeline analysis of every MCU Spider-Man appearance, from Civil War to Brand New Day. We will break down the other storyline issue by issue for anyone who wants to read the comics before the film comes out. And of course, once Brand New Day hits theaters in July, I will be right here with a full breakdown. All the Easter eggs, all the surprises, all the moments that made us laugh or cry or gasp. The Spider-Man community is one of the most passionate and thoughtful fandoms in all of pop culture. And being part of it, sharing these evenings with you, speculating and dreaming and getting excited about stories together, that is genuinely one of my favorite things in the world. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for caring about a kid from Queens who just wanted to do the right thing. Until next time, take care of yourselves. The world needs more people like Peter Parker. People who see someone in trouble and choose to help, not because anyone is watching, not because they will get credit or recognition or reward, but simply because it is the right thing to do. That is what Spider-Man teaches us. That is what he has always taught us. And on that note, good night. Sleep well. And remember, with great power comes great responsibility. But with great friends comes great comfort. Peter Parker is going to learn that lesson in Brand New Day, and maybe we can learn it too. Sweet dreams, my friends. See you next time.